Okay, now we turn our attention to Module 25, and we're marching through basically the various components of memory and uh, how we not only process it, but how we encode it. And now we're turning our attention now just to retrieval itself, and then finally we'll look a little bit at other aspects, or basically other miscellaneous components, if you will, of memory itself, when we look at forgetting and memory construction and actual how we actually go about improving memory. So let's look at this for a minute. One of the keys when we're talking about memory itself and how it actually works is to keep in mind, it's a little bit like a web, if you will, that moves out in this component network that then moves together, continues to branch out, connecting various pieces of information that slowly become this web of other information that continues to branch out and connect up, essentially. And you you begin to see that one piece of information, and I'm making this way too orderly, if you will, but if I'm looking for this piece of information right in here, I can get at it from a variety of points of view. I might use this piece of information to follow this route to get to it, or I could start with this piece of information and take this route to get to it, if you will. And so the network provides a rich basis on which to get information for us. And what I'm referring to here is something we refer to as retrieval cues. And there are a variety of ways that, sometimes conscious, sometimes not conscious, that trigger these mechanisms that bring pieces of information to us. So to retrieve a specific memory, we need to identify one of the strands that actually connects to it, like this one. Let me use a little different color so that you can see what I mean. So I can follow this strand and it will get me to this information, or I can use this strand that will get me to this information. And each one of those is something that we refer to as priming. And so essentially, I can have one word that, as it says in this diagram over here, one word, the word rabbit, that will activate a concept. And then when I go to spell the word hare, H-A-R-E, then rabbit primes me to pull that particular concept out, that then leads me to say hare, H-A-R-E, rather than H-A-I-R. And so priming is a key component when it comes to activating retrieval cues. That's really what it does, is these cues that we use on a regular basis to pull information out of memory in order to use it, produce it, etc., that are key to understanding it. And that's what priming is. We have it happen all the time. Sometimes, like I said, it tends to be fairly conscious. Sometimes it isn't conscious at all. Essentially, when we're reading, for example, and something triggers another thought, it primes us then to find that particular thought, and it leads then to the concept or the thought that we're trying to get our hands on. And that really, the more, essentially what needs to be understood is the richer the network, essentially the more information that you will have at your disposal. And so a lot of times what makes intelligent people look so intelligent is not so much the pure idea of intelligence itself, as much as it is the network of information that they have developed over the years because of all the reading oftentimes that they've done. So it really is important to understand priming and how it operates. Now, another key concept is something that we refer to, which is pictured over here with with this picture, is something we refer to as state-dependent learning. In state-dependent learning, what was fascinating and how we discovered this is that we would take, researchers took a group of scuba divers underwater and taught them basically a skill or a task, and they learned it, did it proficiently underwater. And then when they brought them, so let me put that, underwater. And then when they brought them above water, got their gear off and everything else, what they found is that their ability to do the skill or the task was decreased. And so above water, they didn't do a very good job at conducting the skill or anything. And so essentially they took them back underwater, and the skill, in a sense, the skill returned. And what we found is that it was dependent or context dependent. In other words, where they learned the skill was where they did the skill most proficiently. And so we call it state dependent. It's also referred to as context dependent. And what is of most interest to you as students is that if you learn something in a particular context, for example, if you learn something in the classroom in which you're tested, your tendency to do better is far greater because it's in the context in which you learned it. Ideally, the best idea for studying when you know that you have an in-seat exam is basically study in the same place or under the same conditions as when you're going to take or where you're going to take your exam as the exam. Now, that may not be realistic because a lot of our classrooms are locked in the evening when you guys are probably doing all of your studying, but even that being said, if you have a quiet environment to study in, and this is a good example, is that, for example, students love to study with music. Think for a minute. When was the last time you took an exam with music? And so you're having a direct impact on your performance because you have one key priming cue in your music that you're not using when you are actually taking the exam. Another one is mood congruent learning, if you will, which is kind of a form of state-dependent learning or state-dependent memory. And essentially, as I mentioned earlier in another video, that our moods have a direct impact on how we remember. And so essentially, moods prime us to produce information, to process memories, and these moods are directly impacted for learning. That's essentially why if you do learning with certain music comes on, something comes back to you. That's a good example of a mood congruent learning, if you will. And memories can be mood congruent. In other words, the research suggests that currently depressed people recall their parents as rejecting, punitive, guilt promoting, whatever it would be, whereas the ones who aren't depressed any longer don't necessarily describe their parents in the very same way. So memories tend to be mood congruent. So when I am depressed, I will look at people in negative ways. When I'm not depressed, oftentimes my memory of them will be very different. And that's another key component when we're talking about retrieval cues is mood. And so two key concepts here that I'm mentioning. One's priming, the other is state-dependent learning. Just remember the people in the scuba gear because they remembered things underwater or they did a task underwater that they couldn't necessarily do when they were above water.